On my mother's 60th birthday, the dining room was glowing with golden light from the chandelier, and the scent of roasted turkey and frosted cake filled the air. Relatives crowded around the long oak table, raising their glasses ready to honor her milestone. I stood near the end, quiet, holding a glass of sparkling water, while everyone else had champagne. My brother Ethan, the golden child, sat proudly beside her, basking in her affection. When the chatter hushed, my mother rose with a practiced smile, her lipstick perfectly red, her pearls gleaming, and she began to speak. "Tonight is not just about me," she said warmly. "It is about the family I built, the pride I feel." Her eyes moved to Ethan and softened. "My son, my pride, my joy. You've made me so proud." Applause erupted, relatives nodding in agreement. Then her eyes landed on me, and her voice turned cold, sharp enough to slice through the air. "And you?" "Natalie," she said, pausing long enough for every ear to tune in, "you're our biggest disappointment." The words echoed like a gavel strike in court. Forks froze mid-air. My aunt gasped audibly. Even the children stopped whispering. I felt every eye burn into me, measuring, judging, relishing the humiliation that had just been served with the birthday cake. My heart pounded, but my face stayed calm. This wasn't new. For 30 years, I had been compared, diminished, overlooked. But hearing it declared on her birthday in front of dozens of witnesses was a blow meant to finish me. My palms itched with the urge to defend myself, yet my lips curled into a faint smile instead. I raised my glass slowly, deliberately, and said, "Okay, I'm not an ATM." A heavy silence fell. Chairs creaked as people shifted uncomfortably. My cousin nearly choked on her drink. Ethan's smile faltered for the first time that evening. My mother's face hardened, color draining, as if I had just shattered the perfect portrait she wanted to display. The tension was electric, unbearable. For years, they had treated me like a walking wallet, the reliable one who would cover the bills, the hospital fees, the repairs, while Ethan was shielded, excused, worshipped. I knew my line had landed like a dagger, exposing the truth in front of everyone. And in that moment, I felt strangely powerful. My uncle cleared his throat, trying to lighten the mood, but the damage was done. Every guest had heard both her cruelty and my refusal to be used again. I set my glass down and stood taller, my heart racing but my voice steady. I didn't need to argue further. The line was drawn. The whispering began around the table, murmurs spreading like fire in dry grass. My mother glared at me, lips pressed so tightly they nearly disappeared. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his collar. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one shrinking under their judgment. I was the one holding the mirror up. At that exact second, I knew this birthday would mark more than my mother's age. It would mark the day I stopped being their silent provider, their scapegoat, their disappointment. It would mark the day I chose to confront the truth. Family can be the cruelest thief of dignity, and dignity is something I would no longer surrender. I was born in Denver in the spring of 1993. The first child of a young couple who thought a daughter was just a rehearsal for the son they really wanted. From the moment my brother Ethan arrived 3 years later, the spotlight shifted and never came back. I remember birthdays where my cake was a single frosted cupcake while Ethan's parties had balloons, magicians, and rented bounce houses. At the time, I told myself it was normal that boys just got more attention, but the sting of being invisible never faded. At school, I loved numbers. I could solve math problems faster than anyone in my class. I dreamed of becoming an accountant, building a stable life with my own effort. Yet every time I brought home an A, my parents barely glanced. "Good," my mom would say, "but did you see Ethan's drawing? He has real talent." They kept his sketches pinned on the fridge, while my honor roll certificates went into a drawer. By high school, Ethan was coasting on charm, while I worked part-time jobs to buy my own clothes. When he crashed Dad's car at 16, they laughed it off as boys being boys. When I missed curfew once because my shift at the diner ran late, I was grounded for a month. The imbalance was relentless, like a scale fixed to tip in his favor no matter what I did. College was my great escape. I worked scholarships, took loans, and sometimes 3 jobs at once just to stay afloat. I didn't expect support, but I still sent part of my paychecks home to help with bills. It became a habit, automatic transfers at the start of each month. My parents never thanked me. They called it your responsibility. Meanwhile, Ethan dropped out of 2 programs, chased music, then sales, then some vague startup dream. Each time he failed, they rallied around him, pouring money into his rent, his car, his debts. When I asked about it once, Mom's reply was sharp. "Your brother has potential. You're stable." "That's what you're supposed to be." The words etched deep, reducing my hard-earned stability into something invisible, worthless. The cruelest memory came one Christmas. I had saved for weeks to buy my parents a new microwave because the old one sparked and smoked. I wrapped it carefully, proud I could finally give something useful. Ethan stumbled in late empty-handed, yet when Mom unwrapped the box, she frowned. "Why waste money on this? You should have just given us cash." Then Ethan handed her a sloppy handwritten coupon promising one free car wash, and she squealed with delight, hugging him like he had gifted her the moon. I stood there holding shredded wrapping paper, feeling smaller than the lights on the tree. That was the moment I stopped craving their approval. I decided instead to build a career solid enough that I would never need to beg for their praise. I became an accountant, earned my license, and within a few years bought my own modest condo. Still, the habit of helping lingered. When Dad needed new tires, I paid. When Ethan fell behind on rent, I loaned him money I knew would never return. Each time, Mom reminded me family means sharing, but sharing always meant me giving them taking. By 30, I had sent nearly $40,000 back home while scraping to cover my own student loans. Yet they never saw me as generous, only as convenient. The resentment built quietly, layer on layer, until it was no longer invisible. I was the dependable daughter, the stable one, the human ATM. And though I smiled, though I kept working, and sending, a part of me knew the day would come when I couldn't carry them anymore. The day would come when their words would cut too deep to ignore. By the time I turned 25, my life looked stable on paper. I had secured a position as a junior accountant in a mid-sized Denver firm, steady hours, health insurance, a paycheck that arrived like clockwork. But stability is deceptive when every dollar has strings attached. Each month, before I paid my own rent, before I chipped away at the student loans piling like bricks on my shoulders, I wired money to my parents. Sometimes it was for their electric bill. Other times for emergency repairs to a house that never seemed fixed. They treated my salary like part of the family budget, as if I had no right to decide where it went. I remember one particular Friday night, exhausted after tax season, when my phone buzzed. It was Mom. "Natalie, we need $600 for Ethan's car payment. He can't risk losing his vehicle right now. He's finally chasing something big." I had $740 left in my account, barely enough to last until the next paycheck. My throat tightened. "Mom, I have bills too." Silence. Then her voice sharpened. "Don't be selfish. You're the responsible one. He just needs a chance." I sent the money crying as I hit confirm transfer, knowing I'd live off instant noodles for 2 weeks. That pattern repeated endlessly. Ethan started a landscaping business. It collapsed in 6 months. He joined a friend's crypto scheme. He lost thousands. Each time I was told to rescue him. Each time Mom called me cold if I hesitated. "We raised you better than this," she'd say, weaponizing guilt as naturally as breathing. Dad stayed mostly quiet, a shadow nodding along his pride tied up in Ethan's entrepreneurial spirit. At work, my colleagues celebrated small luxuries, weekend trips, new clothes, brunches. I always declined invitations, too broke to join. They assumed I was frugal, maybe shy. In truth, I was funneling half my income into a black hole of family expectation. When my manager praised me for my meticulous reports, I felt a sting. If only my parents valued me half as much as this man who barely knew me. By 28, I saved enough for a down payment on a modest condo in a quiet Denver neighborhood. I thought foolishly that owning property might shift my family's perception, that maybe pride would replace disdain. Instead, Mom visited once, wrinkled her nose at the small kitchen, and asked, "How much equity can you pull?" "Ethan has a business plan and needs investors." My stomach dropped. She didn't see my condo as independence. She saw it as collateral for Ethan's next failure. The most painful night came when I found myself at the ER clutching paperwork for Dad's heart checkup. Insurance covered most, but there was still a $1, $200 gap. I swiped my card without hesitation. Ethan wasn't there. He was in Vegas posting photos with friends captioned "Chasing Dreams." When I showed Mom the receipt hoping for gratitude, she only sighed. You did the right thing. Family first. No thank you, no acknowledgement of sacrifice. Just expectation cemented further. Still, I kept sending. By 30, I had transferred nearly $40,000 across years. My own savings account was thin, my vacations non-existent, my clothes secondhand. Yet Ethan drove a newer car than mine, wore designer sneakers, and laughed about how Natalie always lands on her feet. That was the paradox I carried them, and still I was branded the disappointment. They looked at Ethan unstable, irresponsible, and saw promise. They looked at me reliable and steady and saw only dullness. I was not their pride, only their resource. The tension grew heavy, impossible to ignore. I started waking at night with clenched fists, teeth grinding until my jaw ached. I replayed every conversation, every insult, every casual dismissal. The humiliation wasn't just private anymore. Relatives whispered that Ethan was the star and I was just the accountant. Even at church gatherings, my mother introduced me as Natalie. She helps us out sometimes. Helps us out. As if my entire adult life boiled down to wiring money home like a faceless bank teller. Something in me hardened. Each transfer became heavier. Each call from Mom chipped at the last of my patience. I began to imagine what would happen if I stopped. What would they do without me? Would Ethan finally face reality, or would they collapse under the weight of their own choices? I didn't know the answer yet, but I knew one thing: the resentment was turning into resolve. The weeks leading up to my mother's 60th birthday felt like a slow tightening of a noose. She called me 3 separate times, each conversation more pointed than the last. Natalie, you'll cover the catering, won't you? It's only fair. You're the one with a steady job. Then we'll need flowers. Nothing cheap. This is a milestone. Finally, don't forget the cake. 3 tiers, buttercream elegant. By the time she finished listing demands, the total was over $2,000. I sat at my kitchen table staring at my checking account, the balance barely enough to cover my mortgage and car payment. Yet I transferred money anyway, each click of confirm like a nail driven into my chest. Ethan, meanwhile, promised he'd bring the energy. That was my mother's phrase, spoken proudly as though charisma could pay for champagne or rented linens. He strutted around in new clothes, flashing a designer watch I knew he couldn't afford without someone else footing the bill. I didn't ask where the money came from. I already knew the answer me. My closest friend Marissa noticed the strain. Over lunch one Saturday, she asked gently, "Why do you keep doing this?" "They don't see you, Nat. They only see your wallet." I poked at my salad, ashamed. "If I don't, they'll say I abandoned them." She leaned closer, her voice firm. "And if you keep doing it, you'll abandon yourself." Her words echoed long after the check arrived. The night before the party, I sat in my living room surrounded by receipts. Caterer, florist, bakery, each line item a reminder of what I had sacrificed to maintain appearances. My condo felt colder than usual, silent, except for the hum of the fridge. I thought about the trip to California I had postponed again, the retirement savings account I hadn't touched in months, the wardrobe of outdated suits I rotated endlessly. All of it so my family could stand in a room the next day and pretend we were picture perfect. I told myself maybe this party would shift something. Maybe if I showed up, smiled, contributed, they would finally acknowledge me. Maybe Mom would introduce me proudly just once as her daughter, the professional. The hope was small, fragile, but I clung to it because hope was all I had ever chased in that family. When I arrived at the banquet hall, the scene was already buzzing. White tablecloths, crystal glasses, a chandelier glinting overhead. I watched guests laugh and mingle, oblivious to the invisible ledger written across my bank account. My aunt greeted me with a polite nod, her eyes sliding past me to Ethan, who was regaling a cluster of cousins with some story that had them doubled over in laughter. I slipped into a chair near the end of the table, unnoticed the way it had always been. My mother floated around the room like a queen, pearls at her throat, soaking up compliments about the decor. Every time someone praised the setup, she smiled graciously, never once glancing my way. It was as though the thousands I spent had been erased, credited instead to Ethan's mere presence. As dinner plates were cleared, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I knew a speech was coming. My mother loved speeches. She thrived on them, especially when they offered her a stage to reinforce the narrative she had been crafting for decades. Ethan, the prodigy me, the disappointment. My hands shook slightly under the table, but my face betrayed nothing. When she rose glass in hand, the room hushed. "Tonight is not just about me," she began, her voice warm and melodic. "It is about the family I built, the pride I feel." My eyes fixed on the flickering candles in front of me. I already knew where this was headed. She turned to Ethan first, as expected. "My son, my pride, my joy, you've made me so proud." Applause thundered. Ethan basked his grin wide, his arm around her shoulders like he had earned the crown. Then came the pause, that deliberate turn toward me. I lifted my gaze, meeting her eyes with a steadiness I didn't quite feel. Her smile thinned. "And you, Natalie, you're our biggest disappointment." The words landed like stones, heavier than the chandelier above. Gasps, murmurs, forks clattering against plates. A cousin's eyes widened. My aunt covered her mouth. It was not just cruelty. It was execution, public and final. And yet, instead of shattering, something inside me crystallized. My lips curved into a calm smile. I raised my glass with measured grace. "Okay," I said softly, but the word carried slicing through the silence. "I'm not an ATM." The hall froze. Ethan's smirk vanished. My mother's face drained of color. The room filled with a tense electric silence that no toast could rescue. For the first time in my life, I had answered not with tears, not with compliance, but with a truth sharp enough to cut the entire performance apart. The silence after my words stretched so long I could hear the chandelier humming above us. Forks hovered in mid-air, eyes darted, whispers swelled like a low tide. I kept my glass lifted calm, even though my pulse hammered in my ears. It was the kind of silence that follows a glass shattering on marble the moment everyone wonders who will clean up the pieces. Ethan was the first to react. He forced a laugh too loud, clapping his hands together. "She's joking, everyone. Natalie has a dry sense of humor." He looked around for agreement, desperate to plaster over the crack I'd just made in their performance. But no one laughed with him. A cousin coughed awkwardly. My uncle stared down at his plate. The only sound was the creak of chairs as guests shifted uncomfortably. My mother's lips parted, trembling with rage she could barely contain. "How dare you speak to me like that on my birthday?" Her voice was a hiss meant for me, but the microphone in her hand carried it to the whole room. A murmur rippled through the guests. She set the mic down with a clatter, cheeks flushed crimson. I didn't flinch. "How dare you call your own daughter a disappointment in front of everyone?" My tone was quiet but firm, the kind of voice I had heard attorneys use in court when facts could not be denied. "I've covered your bills, your parties, your hospital fees. If being useful only makes me an ATM, then maybe that's all you ever saw me as." Gasps. A cousin dropped her napkin. My aunt shook her head slowly, as if she had just witnessed lightning strike indoors. My father, who had stayed silent all evening, finally spoke. His voice was gravelly unsure. "Natalie, maybe this isn't the place." "It's exactly the place I interrupted, surprising even myself. You all applauded when she praised Ethan. You all stayed silent when she humiliated me." "Well, silence is over." My hands no longer shook. They rested steady on the tablecloth as if rooted. Ethan leaned forward, his charm cracking. "You think you're better than us just because you make spreadsheets? You wouldn't have anything if not for us." I met his eyes unblinking. "Everything I have I earned. The condo, the car, the career, and half of it has gone straight into your pockets while you squandered it on dreams you never saw through." The truth hung heavy in the air, undeniable. Guests whispered louder now. Someone at the back muttered, "I always wondered who paid for all this." My mother slammed her glass onto the table, liquid sloshing over the rim. "Enough, you will not embarrass me in front of my friends." I stood slowly, pushing my chair back with deliberate calm. "No, Mother. You embarrassed yourself the moment you chose to humiliate me in public." The room fractured into chaos. Some relatives hurried to soothe my mother, patting her shoulders, whispering consolations. Others turned to me with wide eyes, their expressions a mix of pity and newfound respect. My cousin whispered, "Good for you," as I passed. I walked toward the exit, every step measured, the echo of my heels striking like gavel blows. Behind me, voices tangled, Ethan protesting, Mom wailing, Dad calling my name. But I didn't turn back. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one retreating in shame. I was the one walking away with dignity intact. Outside, the cool night air hit my face sharp and cleansing. I drew a long breath, chest heaving, heart pounding with both fear and exhilaration. My phone buzzed in my purse, Marissa. I answered, my voice steadier than I expected. "I did it!" I whispered. I told them I'm not their ATM. On the other end, Marissa let out a soft laugh of relief. "Finally. You've been carrying them for too long. Now it's their turn to stand on their own." I glanced back through the glass doors. Inside, the once perfect party had dissolved into clusters of murmurs and pointing fingers. The illusion of unity was gone, and I was the one who had ripped the curtain down. In that moment, standing alone under the Denver night sky, I realized the betrayal had already happened years ago. Tonight was not the beginning of their cruelty, it was the end of my silence. And the fallout was only just beginning. The morning after the party, my phone lit up with messages like a switchboard on fire. Missed calls from Mom, voicemails from Dad, a flood of texts from cousins. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I brewed coffee in my quiet condo and sat at the kitchen table, letting the silence soak into me like sunlight. My hands still trembled slightly, the adrenaline of last night lingering in my veins. But beneath it all, I felt something I hadn't in years: peace. By noon, the messages grew more desperate. Mom's first voicemail was fury. "How dare you humiliate me in front of everyone?" The second was guilt. "Do you know how much stress you put on my heart?" The third was bargaining. "If you apologize publicly, maybe we can fix this." I deleted each one without listening twice. Dad's message was softer but still laced with expectation. "Nat, you know your mother." She didn't mean it the way it sounded. "Come over, talk it out." He didn't understand that the words had been meant exactly as they sounded. Ethan's texts were a barrage of insults. "You ruined everything. You're jealous. No one cares about your stupid job. And finally, you'll regret this when they cut you out." I stared at the last message and laughed bitterly. Cut me out of what respect I never had, support I never received. In truth, there was nothing left to lose. But outside my immediate family, the tide was shifting. By the second day, I received quiet messages from relatives who had been at the party. One cousin wrote, "I always wondered who was paying for all the dinners. Now I know." An aunt texted, "You were brave. I wish I had spoken up years ago." Even my father's sister, a woman known for never meddling, called to say, "You told the truth, Natalie. Don't let them twist it." Their words were small, but they were the first cracks of light in a wall I thought was impenetrable. At work, Marissa cornered me in the break room. "So, how did it go?" I poured sugar into my coffee, trying to steady my voice. "I told them I'm not their ATM." Her eyes widened, then softened into a smile. "About time." I exhaled. "Now they're calling nonstop. They're panicking." She touched my arm. "That's what happens when the well runs dry." On the third day, Mom showed up at my condo unannounced. I watched from the peephole as she stood there, arms folded, pearls still around her neck as if the party hadn't ended. When I didn't open, she rang again, then spoke through the door. "Natalie, you're being ridiculous. We need to talk about finances. The mortgage is due. Ethan's car payment is late. You can't just walk away." Her words stabbed through the wood. "Can't just walk away," as though my life were a contract signed in blood, permanent, unbreakable. I backed away silently until her shadow disappeared. That evening, I opened my banking app and did something I should have done years earlier. I canceled every automatic transfer, rent, utilities, medical bills. They were no longer my responsibility. My thumb hovered over the final confirm button, and when I pressed it, my chest felt lighter, like chains falling away. The calls didn't stop, but my resolve held. Ethan left a voicemail dripping with contempt. "You think you're free now? Wait until Mom rewrites her will. You'll get nothing." His threat rolled off me. I didn't want their inheritance. I wanted my dignity. By the end of the week, word of the party had spread beyond family. A neighbor from my parents' street emailed me. "I heard what happened. Don't let them shame you. Everyone knows you've carried them for years." The gossip stung at first, but then I realized for once the narrative wasn't controlled by my mother's polished lies. People were starting to see the truth. That Sunday, I skipped the family's usual dinner for the first time in a decade. Instead, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the Denver skyline glow in the distance. I thought about the years I had lost to the vacations I had denied myself, the nights I had cried over bills that weren't mine. And I thought about the moment at the party when my voice cut through decades of silence. It was more than a sentence. It was a declaration. I was not their ATM. I was not their disappointment. I was their mirror, and they couldn't bear to see their reflection. By the second week, my mother's anger turned into something sharper strategy. The calls shifted tone. No more screaming, no more guilt trips. Instead, her voice came laced with rehearsed calm. Natalie, let's be reasonable. Ethan is under a lot of pressure. The bank is threatening repossession. If you step in now, we can avoid embarrassment. The word embarrassment stuck with me. Not hardship, not foreclosure. Embarrassment. That was what she feared most. Not losing money, but losing face. I hung up without a word, but the seed had been planted. If they were desperate enough to keep pushing, what else would they try? I had spent too long reacting, absorbing, bending. Now I needed to prepare. At work, I pulled up my online banking history during lunch breaks. Years of transfers stretched back like scars across a ledger. $400 here, $700 there, $1, $200 for Dad's procedure, $200,000 for Ethan's business launch. I printed statements and slid them into a folder. Line after line, I built the story they had always denied. I was the financial backbone of a family that treated me as invisible. Marissa watched me one afternoon as I spread papers across my dining table. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Documenting," I said. My voice was steady, though my hands trembled. "If they try to come after me legally, socially, however, I want proof of what I've given. Proof I was never just a disappointment." She nodded slowly. "It's smart. But Nat, you also need to prove it to yourself, to remind yourself you weren't crazy." She was right. Each receipt, each bank confirmation was a mirror held up to the gaslighting I'd endured. I wasn't selfish. I wasn't ungrateful. I had been exploited. On the third weekend, I received a letter that chilled me more than any voicemail. An envelope slid under my condo door, no stamp, no return address. Inside was a photocopy of a loan application with my name typed at the bottom. My signature was forged in uneven ink. The amount requested $15,000. My mother's handwriting filled the purpose-line family emergency expenses. My chest constricted. They weren't just asking anymore. They were trying to use my name, my credit, my future. I called Marissa immediately. She came over, eyes widening as she studied the paper. "This is fraud," she said. "You need to protect yourself." I called a lawyer the next morning. Sitting in the oak-paneled office, I slid the forged document across the desk. The attorney, a calm woman with silver hair and sharp glasses, studied it with practiced eyes. "This is serious," she said. "Do not confront them directly. Keep gathering documentation. If they try to file anything in your name, we'll have evidence." Her confidence steadied me. For the first time, I felt the balance tipping. My parents had always counted on my silence, my compliance, but silence was no longer their ally. That night, I opened my laptop and created a digital folder labeled Truth. Into it, I placed scans of every transfer, every receipt, every email where my mother had written things like, "Send money today," or "Your father won't get treatment," or "If you loved us, you'd help." Words once designed to twist my heart now looked different in black and white. They were evidence. Ethan called 2 days later, voice slick as oil. "Nat, let's cut a deal. You cover the next 3 months of my car, and I'll tell Mom to back off." I nearly laughed. "You think you can negotiate with me?" "You'll regret this," he snapped. "Family doesn't turn on family." The words burned, but not the way he intended. "Family turned on me a long time ago, Ethan," I said and hung up. After that, the calls slowed. The silence from their side wasn't peace, it was plotting, but I no longer felt unarmed. For once, I had more than hurt feelings. I had proof. One evening, I spread the documents across my dining table again, this time not in despair, but in quiet triumph. Each page was a step toward freedom, a barrier against their lies. I thought about the birthday party, the chandelier light, the echo of my mother's words. And I thought about my own reply. Calm, sharp, undeniable. I wasn't an ATM, and now finally I could prove it. Thanksgiving arrived with icy winds sweeping across Denver, the kind that sting your cheeks and make every breath visible. I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to stay in my condo warm and alone, sipping wine, while the city lights blinked below. but the folder labeled Truth sat on my counter like a challenge. For years, I had let them control the story. Now I had the chance to seize it back. The house was glowing when I pulled into the driveway. Cars lined the street, laughter spilled through the windows, and the smell of roasted turkey drifted out the door as I walked up the steps. My hands trembled around the leather satchel holding my evidence. Inside, relatives crowded the living room. Children darted between adults carrying plates of pie. My mother, resplendent in a burgundy dress, swept from guest to guest with her perfected hostess smile. Ethan lounged on the couch, beer in hand, retelling some exaggerated story that drew chuckles from cousins. For a moment, it looked like nothing had changed since her birthday, as though my defiance had been erased. Until I stepped into the room, conversations faltered. A few relatives offered tentative smiles. Others looked away. My mother's face froze for a split second before she smoothed it into polite indifference. "Natalie," she said, voice tight. "You came." "I did," I answered evenly, "and I brought something with me." Ethan snorted. "What more attitude?" I didn't rise to the bait. Instead, I walked to the dining table, set my satchel down, and pulled out the folder. The rustle of papers drew curious glances. For years, I began my voice carrying just enough to quiet the room. I've been told I was the disappointment, that I contributed nothing while Ethan was the pride of this family. I laid out the bank statements page after page like cards in a game no one wanted to play. But here is the truth. Gasps rose as eyes scanned the numbers. Transfers, memos, receipts. $400, $700, $1, $200, thousands flowing from me to them. My mother's face paled. Ethan's smirk twitched. "This," I continued, holding up the forged loan application, "is what they tried to do when I finally said no. They used my name, my signature, without my consent." Aunt Linda pressed a hand to her chest. "My God!" Dad's voice broke the silence, low and defensive. "Natalie, you didn't have to bring this here." "Yes, I did." I shot back. "Because for decades you let her humiliate me in private. And on her birthday, she humiliated me in public. So today, in front of the same audience, I'm telling the truth." Ethan surged forward, face flushed. "You think waving papers makes you a hero? You wouldn't even have that job if we hadn't. If you hadn't, what I cut in. Drained me until I had nothing left. Mocked me while I kept you afloat." My voice cracked, not from weakness, but from the weight of years finally given sound. "I'm done." Relatives exchanged uneasy glances. A cousin whispered, "I knew she was helping, but I didn't realize it was this much." Another muttered, "That's fraud." The tide was shifting right before their eyes. My mother's mask shattered. "How dare you air our dirty laundry on Thanksgiving? This is family business." I locked eyes with her, steady. "Family business is what you call it when you want silence. This is abuse. And it ends now." The room buzzed with whispers, the air thick with tension. Dad rubbed his temples, silent. Ethan slammed his beer onto the table, muttering curses. But the relatives, the ones who had always looked at me with pity or disdain, now looked at me with something new, respect. I gathered the papers back into the folder, sliding them neatly into my bag. I didn't come here to fight. I came here to make it clear that I will no longer be your provider, your scapegoat, or your disappointment. I will be free. Without waiting for a response, I lifted my coat from the chair and walked toward the door. Behind me, voices rose, Mom calling my name, Ethan cursing an aunt, scolding them both. But I didn't turn back. The cold air outside was sharp, but it felt like clarity, like oxygen after years of suffocation. As I walked to my car, I realized the confrontation wasn't just about exposing them. It was about reclaiming myself. And as the wind whipped around me, carrying fragments of voices from the house, I smiled. The truth was no longer hidden, and they could never bury it again. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, a thick white envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was a letter from the bank confirming that my name had been used on a fraudulent loan application. The forged signature, the request for $15,000, it was now under formal investigation. My stomach twisted as I read the words, but instead of fear, I felt a grim steadiness. They had crossed the line, and now the law would step in. I called the lawyer with silver hair, the one who had studied the forgery weeks earlier. She listened carefully, then said, "This works in your favor. The bank has already flagged the document as fraudulent. With your evidence of prior transfers and coercion, this case is strong." Strong. The word echoed in my mind like a bell. For so long, strength had meant endurance, swallowing insults, absorbing blows, sending money. Now strength meant fighting back. Within days, a detective reached out asking for an interview. I sat in a small office with beige walls and recounted everything: the decades of favoritism, the financial exploitation, the forged document. I handed over the folder labeled Truth. The detective flipped through the pages, whistling low. "This is extensive. You've practically built the case for us." Meanwhile, the ripple through our community was undeniable. At church, whispers followed my parents down the aisle. Neighbors who once praised Ethan's charm now crossed the street to avoid him. My mother tried to spin the story, telling anyone who would listen that I was unstable, bitter, exaggerating. But the evidence was too clear. Relatives who had seen the papers on Thanksgiving quietly spread the truth. The narrative she had controlled for decades slipped out of her grasp like sand through fingers. One evening, Dad called. His voice was weary, cracked with something almost like regret. "Natalie, your mother's health is suffering from all this stress. Can't you just let it go?" "Let it go," I repeated, stunned, after she forged my name, after she drained me for years. "No, Dad, this isn't just family drama anymore. This is criminal." He sighed heavily, and for the first time he didn't argue. Ethan, however, doubled down. He showed up at my condo one night, pounding on the door until the neighbors threatened to call the police. His voice bellowed through the hallway. "You ruined us. You'll pay for this." I stayed behind the locked door, phone in hand, recording every word. Later, I emailed the file to my lawyer. Another piece of evidence, another nail in their case. When the court summons arrived, I felt a strange calm. The day of the hearing, I walked into the courthouse wearing my one good suit, Marissa by my side. Across the aisle sat my mother in her pearls, Ethan scowling beside her. For years, they had towered over me, dictating the story. But in that sterile courtroom, with the judge seated high and the clerk recording every word, we were finally equals. The bank's representative testified first, confirming the forgery. Then my lawyer presented the mountain of transfers, receipts, and messages. She read aloud one of Mom's emails. "If you loved us, you'd send the money right now." The courtroom was silent, every syllable heavy. My mother's face tightened, Ethan's jaw clenched. When I took the stand, my voice shook at first, but steadied with each word. They called me a disappointment, but I was the one paying their bills. I was the one carrying them. And when I said no, they tried to steal my name. I met the judge's gaze. I am not their ATM. I am their daughter, and I deserve respect. The decision came swiftly. The loan was declared void. The bank pursued charges for attempted fraud. My parents and Ethan left the courtroom in silence, their faces drained of color. The illusion of superiority, of untouchable pride, was gone. That evening, as I walked out into the cool Denver air, I felt the weight of years lift from my shoulders. Justice hadn't fixed everything. It couldn't erase the scars of favoritism, the loneliness of being unseen. But it had drawn a line they could no longer cross. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving my family. I was free of them. In the weeks after the court ruling, silence settled over my life like fresh snow. No more frantic calls, no more guilt-laced voicemails, no more late-night banging on my door. For the first time in years, my phone was quiet. At first, the silence unnerved me. I had been conditioned to expect chaos, to brace for the next demand. But gradually, the quiet transformed into peace. I sat at my dining table one evening, staring at the neat folder labeled Truth. It was no longer just evidence. It was my history. Years of transfers, receipts, and pleas proof that I had carried a family who only called me a disappointment. I slid the folder into my desk drawer, locking it away. I didn't need to keep it visible anymore. The fight was done. That weekend, Dad called again. His voice was tired, almost brittle. "Natalie, your mother hasn't been herself." The neighbors whisper. "Ethan can't find work." "We're struggling." His pause was long, deliberate. "Can't you come home for Sunday dinner just once? Pretend things are normal." I closed my eyes, remembering the birthday toast, the word disappointment hanging in the air like smoke. I remembered the forged signature, the court hearing, Ethan screaming in my hallway. My chest tightened, but my answer was clear. "No, Dad, I'm not coming back. Not now. Maybe not ever." He sighed heavy and hollow. "So that's it." "Yes," I said softly. That's it. I've done my part. More than my part. I deserve a life of my own. The line crackled with silence, then clicked dead. I set the phone down, my hand steady. That night, I began practical steps to solidify my boundaries. I changed my phone number, keeping only close friends and colleagues informed. I updated passwords, removed my parents as emergency contacts at work and in medical files. I called my bank to flag any suspicious attempts under my name. Each action was a small brick in the wall I was finally building between myself and them. Marissa noticed the difference. Over coffee, she smiled. "You look lighter." "I feel lighter," I admitted. "Like I've been carrying a boulder and finally set it down." "You're not just lighter," she said. "You're free." Her words sank deep. Freedom. A concept that had always felt unreachable, reserved for other families, other lives. Now it was mine. The holidays came and went. I spent Christmas with Marissa's family, who welcomed me with laughter and warmth. They bought me a small gift, a scarf in my favorite color, and the gesture, simple as it was, made me tear up. No conditions, no strings, just kindness. For the first time in years, I felt what family was supposed to mean. Meanwhile, whispers about my parents and Ethan grew louder. The fraud case had stained their reputation. Neighbors distanced themselves, relatives stopped visiting. My mother still tried to spin stories, but without money flowing in from me, her facade cracked. Ethan's charm no longer paid his bills. The golden child's shine had dulled, leaving only tarnish. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Their downfall was their own doing. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. I opened a savings account solely for myself, the first deposit feeling like a small victory parade. I joined a yoga class, took long walks in Denver's crisp evening air, even booked a short trip to California, the trip I had postponed for years. Standing on the Pacific coast, waves crashing against the rocks, I felt the weight of the past finally wash away. Cutting ties wasn't just about saying no. It was about saying yes to myself, to the life I deserved, to the peace I had earned. I wrote one final letter, short and simple, and mailed it to my parents. I will no longer be providing financial support. I will no longer tolerate humiliation or disrespect. I am your daughter, but I am not your scapegoat, and I am not your ATM. Please do not contact me unless it is with respect. Natalie. I didn't know if they read it or if they tore it up. It didn't matter. The letter wasn't for them. It was for me. As the new year dawned, I stood on my balcony overlooking the city lights. The night was cold, the air sharp, but inside me burned a steady warmth. I had survived betrayal, exploitation, and humiliation. I had spoken the truth when it mattered most. And now, with the silence of my phone and the peace in my chest, I knew I had reclaimed something no one could take again. Boundaries, dignity, freedom. Spring returned to Denver with crisp mornings and trees budding green against the skyline. It had been 3 months since the court ruling, 2 months since I mailed the letter that ended it all. My life no longer revolved around tense phone calls or last-minute transfers. My days were mine again, filled with quiet routines and small joys that once felt impossible. I started gardening on my balcony, coaxing herbs and flowers from the soil. Each sprout felt like proof that growth could happen even after years of neglect. On weekends, I explored local art galleries or hiked in the foothills, rediscovering the city I had lived in all my life but never truly enjoyed. Freedom didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived in these quiet moments of peace. Work blossomed too. My focus sharpened now that I wasn't drained by constant guilt. My manager noticed. By May, I received a promotion to senior accountant. The raise wasn't enormous, but it was mine earned without anyone's hand pulling at my paycheck. I opened a second savings account and labeled it Future. Watching the balance grow felt like watching myself finally breathe. Marissa remained my anchor. We celebrated my promotion with dinner at a small Italian place downtown. Over pasta and wine, she raised her glass. To boundaries, she toasted. To freedom, I added, clinking mine against hers. My parents never responded to the letter. I heard bits and pieces through relatives Ethan was bouncing between odd jobs. My mother avoided social gatherings my father kept to himself. The once shiny veneer of our family had cracked beyond repair. Some part of me still ached, still wished they had chosen differently. But pain wasn't the same as regret. I no longer regretted walking away. One Sunday morning, I sat in a coffee shop with sunlight spilling across the table. A woman about my age at the next table was whispering fiercely into her phone. I caught fragments always asking for money. Says I'm ungrateful. I can't keep doing this. Her voice trembled, her eyes glistened. I felt an ache of recognition. When she hung up, she noticed me watching and blushed. "Sorry," she murmured. I shook my head. "Don't apologize. I know exactly how that feels." We talked. Her name was Claire, and her story mirrored mine in eerie ways, a sibling favored parents draining her finances, endless guilt. I told her briefly about my journey, about saying no, about drawing the line. She leaned forward wide-eyed. "How did you do it?" I smiled softly. One day at a time, one boundary at a time, and with proof when they tried to twist the truth. She exhaled relief crossing her face. Before we parted, she whispered, "Thank you." I needed to hear that. Walking home, I realized something important. My story wasn't just about me reclaiming dignity. It was about showing others trapped in the same cycle that escape was possible. That night, I opened my journal and wrote, "Family is not defined by blood alone. It is defined by respect, by care, freely given by love without conditions. Anything less is bondage, not family." Looking back, I understood that my mother's cruel words on her birthday were a gift in disguise. They forced me to face the truth. They shattered the illusion that if I just gave enough, if I just worked harder, I could earn their approval. Approval was never theirs to give. Worth was never theirs to decide. Now when I stand on my balcony at night, city lights twinkling below, I feel whole. Not because my family changed, but because I did. I chose to end the cycle. I chose to stop being their ATM. I chose myself. And to anyone who has ever been called a disappointment, who has ever been treated like nothing more than a wallet or a scapegoat, I say this: your value is not measured by what you give to people who refuse to see you. Your value is yours, undeniable, unshakable. The moment you draw the line, the moment you say enough, you reclaim not just your money or your time, you reclaim your life. Blood may tie us, but dignity sets us free. And freedom once claimed is the greatest inheritance of all.